Welcome to those who are joining us for this media briefing on day 3 of the Plenary Council's second gathering here in Sydney. My name's Adrian Taylor and I work for the Communications Office at the Archdiocese of Brisbane. Joining us tonight is a panel of 3 members from the Council: Bishop Mark Edwards, OMI, Monica Conway and Dr Maeve Louise Heaney. A brief pen pick of each of the participants. Monica Conway is a recently retired from the position of Assistant Director in Catholic Education, South Australia. Monica is an experienced school and system leader who worked at the Catholic Education Office for 17 years, during which she led a number of teams focused on Catholic identity, leadership and learning initiatives, including in religious education, spiritual and religious formation of leaders and staff, youth ministry and family formation. Dr Maeve Louise Heaney, VDMF, is a consecrated member of the Verbum Day community and Director of the Xavier Centre for Theological Formation at Australian Catholic University. She is the President of the Australian Catholic Theological Association, ACTA, and specialises and researches into the areas of theological aesthetics, music, spirituality and systematic theology at ACU and at Holy Spirit Provincial Seminary, Queensland. And Bishop Mark Edwards is a member of the Congregation of the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. After serving as Auxiliary Bishop of Melbourne for several years, he was named Bishop of Wagga in 2020. He was born in Indonesia, but spent most of his childhood in Melbourne, including at Mazenod College, where he first encountered the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. So to kick things off with the members, we perhaps ask if you want to give a quick reflection on the first 2 days of the sessions.
You have the microphone, Maeve. You can start.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I got it. Thank you. So it's a few things probably. First, it's a joy to actually be in the same room together. You know, we're a broad church, we're diverse, but it really does make a difference that you can have motions, you can have theology, but then you can actually go, what did you mean by that? And can we talk about that? Not so sure about the other. And I've had a few of those conversations during the day. So that's one thing. And the other thing I would just notice is I was very moved yesterday and this morning with how clearly we welcomed Theme 1 around First Nations and Indigenous people. I was just so moved, and I know they were kind of wondering, and I was going, this is just, it's so clear. And it was beautiful to see it, and I just to watch them. And I have to say, I'm going to introduce this. I don't usually wear beads, but I've worked during this time with Tony Janke, who's a member for Brisbane. And as I was going to do an intervention today, she gave me her beads, which for me was just humbling. I thought, how beautiful. So there's something about the journey and the accompanying and what's happening in the room. That's my intervention.
I'd like to reflect on my stable table. So we're in tables of about 8, 9. And it's we're in the same group for the whole time, but the sharing, the truthfulness, the courage, particularly I think saying something which is a bit different, which is a bit contrary to what everybody else is sharing is challenging, and people have been prepared to do that, and that's helped me a lot. It's helped me to be more humble about my original thought, because I then have to put it in under the judgment of that alternative statement. So but the tables have been a real joy, and I do hope to keep in contact with the people on the table as time goes on after the conference as well.
Thank you. Yes, picking up a couple of those things, I think the journey here, starting at the airport, meeting with other members from our Archdiocese and then travelling together to be in person, that's been had a big impact, I think, on the way I've been able to engage. The other part of that, I think, is being confronted in a more personal way with views that maybe I haven't heard before or might be different and challenging me. And you realise that the in-person has its joys and its challenges. I've really reflected today that you do tend to hang around and talk to people often that have similar views or filter out the others. And I thought this really represents our whole church. You get a sense of all of that variety.
Thank you, Monica. We'll open it up to questions now. Whoever's willing to go first?
Mark Bowling from the Catholic Leader, Brisbane-based, Global Reach. Question to you, Maeve, first of all. Look, I was speaking to Archbishop Coleridge this afternoon, and this is about providing women and men equal dignity in Australia. Now, I know you can't say the outcome, and I don't know, but he told me that it's a very close call whether the motion supporting women becoming church deacons goes ahead or not. So I don't know if it has passed or will pass, whatever. But I just wanted to get your thoughts about that. He described the movement in discussion on the issue as a tectonic shift. What's your view?
Okay. That's a great question. Thank you, Mark. I think it is. I think it is in one sense a tectonic shift, but in the other,
Just a bit lower.
a bit lower. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. I'd say yes and no. It's tectonic because symbol is important, and we are not used to seeing women in that space, preaching in liturgies and with the roles that deacons would have. We're not. So that's huge. So symbolically, it's huge. Having said that, the proposals that are moving forward in this space are not about rah, let's do this despite everything. They are, if the Commission, and in the measure that the Commission that Pope Francis has, and it's the fourth one, if that goes ahead, we lend our voice to this space. So it's also very cautious and very faithful and very loyal to where the Church is going. It's simply saying in our space, whether it goes forward or it doesn't go forward, it doesn't seem to me that in that sense it's stepping out of sync with anyone else or with the Church as it's seeking to grapple with this. But in the sense that it is opening, or it's seeking to reflect upon how we can visualize women in spaces of leadership and in spaces of teaching and preaching, because the deacon, we must remember, and sometimes we conflate this. And I do think that in all of this, I notice there's a need for theological formation. So deacon ordination and priest ordination is not the same thing. Representing Christ and representing the Church, as Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is not exactly the same thing. So, So yes and no is my answer.
Just in terms of governance for women, though, why, just perhaps spell it out for the media, why is it important for women to have this governance role in the Church?
Okay, I will come back, but first I'm going to pass it to Bishop.
So I think if it goes ahead, if all the ifs and everything, I think that the great advantage that it would offer us is that we would hear a woman preaching at Mass. I've heard people talk about it being involved in governance, but I've been a deacon, and I think they're deeply mistaken. Deacons don't make many decisions. Deacons, it's really the decisions for the parish aren't made by the deacon, they're made by the priest. The decisions for the diocese aren't made by the deacon, they're made by the bishop. So I don't think it's a help with governance. A governance needs to be addressed in other ways, other creative ways, and we do have some options of ways that we can involve women in making decisions. I think the bishop and the priest still take the decision, but we do have ways that we can involve women and in leadership and in governance, but deacon's not going to be part of it. I think that people who think that deacon is making you part of governance are mistaken. Mm-hmm. That'd be my experience.
And if I could just add one thing, if that's okay. Yes. I do think it's important that we think about, and Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium asked us, that's 2013, long time ago, asked us to think about a more incisive presence and voice of women in the Church, and to reflect upon how women could be involved in decision-making spaces. That's 2013. So I do think that's essential, and that implies thinking how our baptismal identity as prophets, priests and kings interacts with theologies of priesthood and theologies of episcopate. And we need to think about that and how we deal with that. And that's essential, but I think that's an issue alongside, and part of, but alongside.
I'll just add to that just putting my education hat on, how important it is for us to recognise the impact of seriously considering the role of women in church will have on young people, and their level of engagement and their attraction to our mission and to sharing that mission. And I can't say that enough and more strongly than for young people, this is a big issue.
Any other questions?
Well, I'll just jump in while you're talking about education and young people. You've had a lot of experience in Catholic education in Adelaide. So I was just going to ask a question about what your hopes are in terms of not necessarily around that particular issue, but about, our Catholic school families, and many of whom are disengaged with the church. And what do you see in the sort of the agenda, I guess, or the program and the discussions that can come out of that at a national level that can sort of translate into how we tackle that issue?
My hope would be that our families and our students, our teachers and all who work in Catholic education just specifically will see that the Plenary Council has been a very tangible sign of a real desire to expand our capacity as a church to be more compassionate, to be more welcoming, to be more inclusive, so that they'll be able to see that there is a real desire for that, because that's the desire I hear from our families, and to hear that reflected. And I think yesterday in particular, a response to First Nations people, Indigenous people and others, and then this morning, I think that was evident, and I think that will really resound or reverberate, I suppose, in the hearts of many in our schools.
Do you want to go next?
Or do you have a follow-up?
Sorry. Well, just following up on that, because you just mentioned the Indigenous issues, I thought maybe one of you could just, perhaps for our listeners, summarise what happened this morning around those motions relating to Indigenous and healing and reconciliation, and what the feeling, because from what I can gather, it was quite emotional, especially for a lot of the younger members, when those motions, even though they weren't necessarily earth-shattering, but they were quite significant. So maybe if someone could give a bit of a rundown on that.
Did you want to say?
I was very moved, I have to say. I was, because as we can't say all of the introduction, all of the motions on First Nations and Indigenous, and the motions on dealing with abuse and woundedness, and they did go through with a really strong majority. So it was a sense of, and let's face it, those are the two issues, well, for me they're foundational. First Nations, we can't be who we're called to be, and I'm owning that as an Irish invited into Australia, but we cannot be who we're called to be unless we're on solid ground and the tree can grow from the roots. So just to hear that echoed with such clarity, and then to hear, I mean, in one sense, the reality of abuse, that's ongoing in how we're dealing with it and the consequences, and we still have a long way to go. But just to have the unison of this is what we have to do, that is very moving. And someone was asking me earlier, so what's going to change? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know yet, but it is not unimportant, like it is significant when representatives of your whole church in Australia come together and say, we agree on this. We have to do this. So I found that very moving. I thought it was very beautiful.
For me, in some ways, that was just a process that one follows. I was actually deeply moved in this space by the welcome to country today, or maybe the acknowledgement of country, delivered by an Aboriginal lady. And after acknowledging the elders and the leaders of the land here, she then acknowledged our families and our ancestors, and that made me realise a little bit maybe what this means for them. And so I'm really it was a very powerful moment for me.
Christian Bergman from Melbourne Catholic. The parity input this morning included a reflection from Dr. Patrick McInerney on the nature of mission. And at the first assembly there was a similar reflection. The stated purpose of the council is to become a more missionary and Christ-centred church. Does there seem to be confusion amongst people as to what the mission of the church actually is, or is there broad consensus amongst people?
That's a great question. And I'm going to say two things. One is, I don't think we can overstate just how important that focus is. And that we're not looking to self-preserve, but to have an outreach and to grow and to dream of a missionary option, to quote him quoting Pope Francis. I think that is essential, and I don't necessarily think it comes easy to us. I will say this. I belong to a community that's missionary. That doesn't mean I'm always missionary, but I do sometimes think some of our discussions and some of our important concerns, necessary concerns, might have a different way of looking if we really have the faces of the people that we're called to reach out to, whether they be people we know or people that we don't. So the second thing, I think we do understand that mission is important. I really do. I think there is a care and a concern for that in the room. I think perhaps the people that we're in touch with and the realities that we're in touch with might be different. So when I was listening to people in the room today, I kind of thought, well, that's your experience of young people. My experience of young people is this. So which sounds, but that's what it's about. So I do think we need to think about that more profoundly.
And I'd like to add to that this, if I can share from our table. I hope it's not breaking any confidences, but one of the people who occasionally courageously gives a contrary position was speaking about how she perceived that other people felt the way we're talking about mission, and in fact the way that she experienced the section that's written in the papers. And she was saying it really feels like we're trying to bring people in. We're trying to bring people in. It feels a little bit like it's about us. And she helped me to realise that our mission always has to be about, actually, I want to offer something really beautiful to you that I've experienced, and I offer it to you. It's not about me. It's not about getting you into the church, although I think that would be a logical conclusion if they did accept that. But it's actually not about that. If it's not about the person that we're talking to, the motivation is just all wrong, and it's not going to work. And I think they'll experience that and understand that. I saw you reaching for the mic.
No, I was just going to say, from that presentation this morning, I got another insight into the mission is there. The church is there to serve the mission. It's not our mission as such. The way that we've owned it sometimes can limit what it is. And it's God's mission. It's, the gospel shows us how. So I think all the time there is a grappling, I would agree, about what it means and who it is for. And so those conversations, I think, will continue and guide us through the week.
Bishop Mark, I was just wondering, in your capacity as a former rector, school rector, how would you describe the mission of the church through education? And is there sometimes a disconnect with the Catholic school system and its engagement with, say, state governments?
I think our school systems engage really well with state and federal governments. I think if there's a disconnect sometimes, one that I fear and one that I hate, it's with our parishes. That tends to be a bigger disconnect, because the families who send their children to school often don't go to, they don't realise that they're part of a parish, and so there tends to be a bigger gap there. I think there's big challenges in education around finding wonderful, engaged, talented teachers who are also faith-filled, who've had an experience of Jesus, who want to offer that to their students. And perhaps one of the challenges that we have is to find multiple overlapping paths to enable our teachers to have an experience of Jesus that excites them so much that they want to share it as well.
Could I say something to that as well? That's also the disconnect that I see a little bit, and working as I do in higher education, although a little bit with Catholic schools, but higher education and also in seminary formation. That and it's not intentional. There's no attitude as in we'll keep these separate. But the fact is, there's a system and a often very efficient education system that is working with their students, and then you have the whole space of the parish, and everybody's doing their best here. But this has an ecclesiology in our imagination, and this has another ecclesiology in our imagination, and we're not together in the room thinking it through, because the people in the schools are going to have to go somewhere, and how do we build that bridge? So I think we need spaces, and actually I'd throw in higher education there as well. I think we need spaces where we're thinking about that better, more inclusively, even if diverse, and therefore forming people to work together and to think things through together in both spaces, because that's the Catholic world, and it's big and it's broad.
I'll just quickly add to that I think what the current context demands of us is rethinking and in collaboration with each other, all these relationships and construction, and the formation of our teachers, the formation of families, alongside the formation of students. We can't rely on things we've done before, or our perspective around, we've got to respond to the context of parishes and dioceses and all of that. We've got to keep rethinking that and revising, I suppose, our assumptions and the way we work. But we've got to do that together because it's a shared mission. The schools have a part in that, but it has to be a collaborative one.
Sorry, we've been saying rethink a lot, and I think that's true, but also recommit to it. Yes. Recommit to that relationship on both sides.
I might throw one in here, and I'll just extend upon, you touched a little bit there on the process, Bishop Mark. Last night we were lucky enough to go to the Ukrainian Mass in the cathedral, and one of the refrains that kept on being said really sat with me, where they were saying, I can't say it perfectly, but it was essentially, listen and be attentive to the Lord. And I was also lucky enough today to be in there and seeing the process. And I couldn't get over the calmness and the studiousness of the people, the members doing their business. They were really reading deeply, they were reflecting on things, and then you'd open up and go around the table. So how is the process, how are you encountering the process, and do you find it opens you up to the Holy Spirit?
It's, I think the phrase is wisdom, be attentive. And the table processes, because people are courageous enough to share who they are, that softens my heart, and I think that enables the Holy Spirit, gives him a little crack to be able to come in and move me a little bit. So, but the table processes are really important.
Just by way of experience, this morning my table experience led me to, everyone in the room was really committed. So personally, it is really helpful to hear that commitment and to hear, even where there's diversity, to hear people being invested. So that provokes in me a welcome of God's invitation that this is God's, not ours. We put our all. But at the end of the day, when you're hearing that in a space, you can kind of let go a little bit and say, okay, God's in the room. so I'll do my best, but it'll be okay.
Any other questions?
Maybe just one other. The Spirit and how it works is one thing, but we are human and words are important. And the wording of particular motions has to have words. So, although again, perhaps you can't answer exactly, but LGBTI plus.
You've missed a Q in there.
This one, sorry. Is that term in or out?
That was a subject of a motion today, and so I'm not able to say that yet. But you'll know it by 9 o'clock tomorrow. We'll know for sure whether it's in or out, because the bishops, even after we have a consultative vote, the bishops can go. They're informed by the consultative vote, but they're not determined by it. So the bishops could go the opposite way to the way that the consultative vote went. So we won't know until after 9 o'clock whether it's in or out, really. And I think that's made public at noon, 1 o'clock. So at 1 o'clock tomorrow, you'll know for sure. But it was a point of question. Yeah.
And I'm going to go broader than that, because I think that's the correct answer. We can't say more, but I would like to pick up on what you're saying, that language is important. And one of the things that I am once again realising, we do need to think about language, and we do need, I'm a theologian, we need theological formation around language, because sometimes, even going back to the question about mission, how we understand things, sometimes we're not that far apart, but how we name it is different, and a word, when it's loaded, can have a reaction perhaps beyond its remit. So I think learning to dialogue about our language is really important, and for me, it's one of the what do we do next that is really important. Apart from the specific options, we need to think about the theological language we're using and to know it better, so that we are better equipped to move things.
And if I can have a second bite of that, I think a lot of it could possibly, when eventually it's decided, it could possibly be portrayed as winners and losers, which would be a shame, because I don't think that's how it is. Some people will probably experience it that way, but I think we have to say that our God is both and. So on this discussion, there's truth in that, and there's truth in that, and how do we hold that together? And can we hold it together? Because sometimes we're not big enough. God's big enough to hold it together, but sometimes we're not. Mm-hmm. So a number of places where there's maybe contentious issues, how I'm always looking for what's the both and solution in this, which I think is the better one, the better solution usually.
Very quickly, I was just going to say, what I've been impressed with too is that people know when to stop the language conversations. It's important to all of us, really critically important, but at other times it's, look, that's okay. We'll be satisfied with that. We'll work with that, so that we're not holding ourselves into a whole committee writing something. And I've been really impressed that there is a very much a general belief that as long as we're satisfied to a point, we're not going to keep refining things to the nth degree just to get everyone to agree on it.
Okay. Any more questions, or have we exhausted? Okay. Well, with that, we might close tonight's media briefing and say thank you very much to our participants, Monica Conway, Dr. Maeve Louise Heaney, and Bishop Mark Edwards OMI. Thank you so much for being with us. We wish you stamina and wisdom for the remaining days of the Plenary Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Especially stamina.